Thanks for listening in. You're tuned to Agriculture Today. Again, we're into the third and final day now of the Hard Winter Wheat Tour throughout Kansas and surrounding states. This is sponsored, to remind you, by the Wheat Quality Council. Day 2 was revealing as far as the prospects of the Kansas wheat crop to be certain. We'll tap now the thoughts of a K-State wheat production specialist who's on the tour and, of course, reporting in to us. We're glad to have aboard once again Romulo Lalato. Romulo, quickly here, did you run into any bad weather as you traveled from western Kansas into south central Kansas yesterday?
Hi, Eric. Yeah, that's a good question. And we were actually, when we got to Edwards County yesterday, the storm started getting to us. And in fact, some tornado watch was going on as well in Edwards County when we were there. From there east, it seems like we were just ahead of the storm for a few miles. So we would go ahead of the storm, stop to sample a field. It would catch up with us, and we would keep going east.
So it pushed you onward.
It kept us on track. So.
Talk about the specific route that you and your group followed yesterday, then, if you would.
Sure, yeah. So yesterday we were in the Black Route, so we left Colby actually all the way into Gove County. From Gove County, we went south, went through Scott, and whenever we got to Finney County, we went east from Finney County, Edwards County, Stafford, and all the way to Wichita there. So we were not by any means anywhere close to the western edge of the tour or to the southern edge of the tour, which is where they saw the probably the worst crop. So we kind of took a more of a central route, going from Colby east and then south into Finney County and east from there.
Like you say, the other tour routes provided more information, which we'd like to talk about here. But what did you see in your trip yesterday? More of the same that you saw on day one, or was it different?
Well, it was different than what we saw on day one. Actually, far northwest Kansas, whatever field we sampled around Colby was actually looking pretty good. Things probably from there northwest is the only part of the state that is actually in a good shape, I would say. Going south on Gove County all the way to Finney County there, we actually were sampling several fields that were coming out at between 20 and 30. And our gut feeling or our eyeball yield estimates were generally even lower in those fields. So that part of the state was in worse shape than what we had seen before. Several fields kind of in that mid-20s, upper 20s maybe. Then as we started to head east, particularly east of Edwards County, the crop was in better shape, better stance probably, and more a little bit more growth to it as well. During that route going south from Gove to Finney County, I remember sampling a field that was at flag leaf emergence, only 9 inches tall. Wow. So very, very drought stressed. And you could see that the drought has already really taken a toll on it, especially from the Walnut perspective, being late, as we saw in the first day, and very small as well.
Then when you moved toward the east, and like you say, you went through the Stafford County area and points onward east toward Wichita, that's where rains had occurred a couple of weeks ago or better that really helped that crop out.
Yeah, so the crop there was definitely in better shape. You could see that it got some rain anywhere up to about parts of that area got up to 3 inches or so of rainfall in these last few weeks, which really kind of saved the crop there. So it was a different crop. I mean, a better yield potential there than what we were seeing in the remaining of the state. Some of the cars were already seeing stripe rust. We did not find any stripe rust in any of our stops, but some of the cars are already reporting. So definitely a better yield potential coming east. But one theme that remains is the lateness of the crop. So we're still behind in schedule, regardless of where we were in the state. Even this portion that was with a good or with a better yield potential, we were still pretty late in development. Probably 2, maybe 3 weeks behind where we're supposed to be at this time. In fact, right now I'm standing in a field in just south of Wellington here in Sumner County. I remember sampling this area last year, and it was almost through that milk stage of grain development. And right now the crop is at boot stage. So it really gives you an idea of how far we are behind in the entire state.
You've made an observation or two on the trip about what it will take to make a decent yield from these shorter, later stands. And you've been quoted as saying near perfect weather is required here. You might elaborate.
Yeah, so the weather from now on is really going to dictate whether this crop is going to be an average to a decent crop or whether we're just going to go downhill. So if the weather conditions turn out to be hot from here on and really, so let's say dry, so that's one thing that's definitely a possibility, right? About 75, 78% of the years in Kansas, we have conditions that are warm enough to hurt our grain field. So that's definitely a possibility there. Now, if the weather conditions turn out to be cool and moist, like we have had grain field in the last 3 years, really the last 3 growing seasons where we had above average precipitation and some good moisture, then we can still probably make a decent crop because for the most part the stand is there, but it's just very drought stressed and very small. One concern that we would have, especially with this very small crop, is definitely complications at harvest. Mm-hmm. So harvesting a 15-inch tall crop is going to be challenging in many parts of the state. So that's definitely something that we need to have as a concern here moving forward, even if conditions are good. Another concern would be stripe rust. So in Oklahoma, they have already reported quite a few fields with stripe rust. The conditions that we have today, as we are out standing in the fields here, it's cool, and we have had some moisture, which are the perfect conditions for stripe rust to develop. So if we do remain cool and moist, producers will have to take this decision, say, well, do I spray a crop that already has a limited yield potential? So it's going to be a challenging decision there as well, and producers will have to consider all their options, especially generic fungicides, which make the disease control more affordable, especially in years where maybe we don't have as much disease as this year, but the conditions are there, and it's probably very likely that it might develop if the conditions remain cool for the next few days.
And you mentioned conditions in our neighboring state to the south, Oklahoma. As a matter of fact, as the group gathered last night in Wichita, representatives from that part of the tour were there to talk about the dire conditions in that state, plus what you were hearing from the other Kansas tour goers from far southwestern Kansas. That all lent to a day 2 average of 35 bushels per acre. That's down considerably from last year, Romulo.
So that's an important point that you make there, Eric. We are actually 11 bushels per acre down from what we estimated last year. That's a huge decrease in yield estimates there. Even if you have the same area, you can do a pretty quick math there and figure out the amount of bushels that we would produce less. And I agree with that, and I even think that 35, 36 bushels per acre is probably a little bit on the positive side. I mean, eyeballing the crop, if weather conditions are normal from here on, my gut feeling is that it will be lower than that. So really a challenging season. The folks in Oklahoma just released the production number about, if I'm not mistaken, close to 58 million bushels instead of their normal 100 or so. And that's considerably low from what they are used to produce there. And that's a consequence of the drought stress. That's the main concern that they had. They also had some freeze damage, so probably area abandonment and graze out will be higher in that part of the country. Mm-hmm. So those conditions can also reflect in our Kansas crop, right? So if we think of Barber County and the southern border of the state, those conditions can definitely reflect there as well to a certain extent. Southwest Kansas into maybe all the way to Comanche or even Barber County. So several concerns now in the growing season, drought being the first one, definitely. But right now, the crop being as late as it is would probably be my either number 1 or even number 2 concern there.
Well, going into the tour, we knew that it was going to be a less than ideal crop. That's obviously being borne out in the tour stops. This is day 3, so Romulo, just brief us on what will happen from here as you and the other groups head your way back to Manhattan.
So now we're just sampling kind of south central Kansas and going into Manhattan, so there's not a lot of wheat that many of these routes are going to actually see unless they drive by Dickinson or Marion counties there or Saline. So we're going to gather in Manhattan. Everyone will give their estimate of what they think the crop is going to be. And from there, we will release the number as a group, right? As a group of 100 people that are going to have done probably 700 or 800 yield estimates around the state. So that's how it works now. We gather in Manhattan. Each one gives our opinion on where the crop is going to be. We average everyone's opinion, and that's the number that is released.
Again, that will come out later today, and if we might, we will catch up with you at that gathering later on and see what you think about that final number once it's released, Romulo.
I'll be glad to do it.
And again, thank you for checking in with us, and safe travels north to finish out the tour. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Romulo Lolato, wheat production specialist, K-State Research and Extension, from far south central Kansas, south of Wellington in Sumner County, with his update on the hard winter wheat tour that's now concluding in Kansas later on today. We'll have more shortly on this Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. In recent days, we've been talking up several considerations on soybean planting, with that crop ever expanding in acreage here in the state. And here's yet one more. There is a disease condition which has taken quite a few bean stands out over the years. It's called sudden death syndrome. And through cultural management, particularly at planting time, one may be able to fend off that disease. That was the genesis of K-State Research on that matter. Along with us now via phone is Eric Ady. Eric is the agronomist in charge of K-State's East Central Kansas Experiment Field and also oversees the Kansas River Valley Experiment Field, both of those in eastern Kansas. And this is where a great lot of this work has been conducted. Eric, with more detail, though, on sudden death syndrome and its severity. This is very much a concern for soybean growers, is it not?
Especially here in the Kansas River Valley, and then there's some other locales around the state. South central Kansas, I understand, has a problem with sudden death, but it's favored by wet soils and cool soils. And if we plant early and it kind of is a wet year, moisture at the right time, it really favors the infection early in the season. Symptoms don't really show up until probably August, but the infection occurs pretty early in the growing season. So we have held off on planting. Kind of the standard routine for farmers down here in the Kansas River Valley is to hold off at least until the middle of May, at least to start planting, because they know they get more SDS if they plant earlier. So that's been kind of standard practice here for a number of years.
The hang up with that approach, though, is that traditionally we've seen soybean yields improve with earlier planting, so the bean is not setting pods in the midst of the worst of the summer heat. Right,
and a lot of research has gone in all over the soybean growing area to the U.S. It shows earlier planting date does increase yields, so that is what kind of got us going on this study. You know, what can we do, hopefully to gain some of that extra yield potential, but how much is SDS really going to hurt us? Mm-hmm. And that's what kind of got some of these studies going.
If one's planting later than May the 10th is the defined date, you typically start to lose a half a bushel per day, so that adds up.
Right, and especially if the soybeans are $10 or $12 a bushel, you're starting to lose your net. Mm-hmm. It costs the same to put in the crop. You don't want to be losing your net off the top end here.
Yeah. Well, this is a two-pronged piece of research here, actually. You looked at planting dates and what are called best management practices. What planting date research did you actually conduct here, Eric?
Okay, we had two different studies. We used the same planting dates for them. Well, generally we were starting right at the end of April or 1st of May for our first planting date, and then about every 2 weeks afterwards, and we went into The one planting date we went to the first week of June, and the other one we went to the end of June. Spread out 3 or 4 planting dates in each study. The one study, we had 2 varieties. One was probably one of the more tolerant varieties, and the other one was very susceptible, both the cyst nematode and the SDS. We put them in these planting dates, and then we take disease ratings and then yields, obviously. And we added a component here the last couple of years is a seed treatment, and we don't have a lot of data on that. We haven't had a lot of SDS pressure recently. But Flupirum is a seed treatment made by Bayer. It goes under the trade name Alivo that we have included to see how that will affect soybean production with earlier planting dates. But we don't have a lot of data on that, specifically on planting dates, but we do have other data showing it is a very effective product.
And you looked at different maturity groups within this whole mix, correct?
In this best management practice, we looked at maturity groups, and we were trying to avoid SDS in this study. We had a Alivo on all the seed, and we had the 3 planting dates, and we ranged from a 3-3 up to a late 4, almost early 5 maturity group. We were wanting to look specifically at maturity groups, but we also had SDS show up in the study, so we took ratings out of that and gathered data from that study as well.
Well, let's go through the results from this multifaceted research. Planting dates, again, with the premise that early planting will usually beget better yields. Late planting might allow one to avoid sudden death syndrome with a higher percentage. What did you find there?
Okay, we found that farmers are right. You do get more SDS when you plant earlier. And we've kind of known that in the research community somewhat. We didn't have exact figures, but yes, we do get more SDS. But what our research has shown the last 3 years is that we do get more yield. And I think what is going on is that we actually have, especially with the more tolerant varieties, a much higher yield potential. SDS may cut off some of that top yield potential, but it'll still yield more than if you wait to the middle of May or later to plant.
Where do those seed treatments come in amidst this then?
Okay, we don't have a lot of data on how planting date affects the seed treatment, but we have a lot of data showing that they are Alivo Flupirum seed treatment is very effective against SDS, but specifically on planting date, we don't have a lot since it was just included the last couple of years or so here, and we haven't had a lot of SDS pressure the last year or so. So hopefully this year we will see how effective they are related to planting date.
So the take-home here, generally speaking, is one can get away with early planting if they've experienced SDS pressure in the recent past, if, in fact, they're selective about the variety they're planting, looking for that tolerance to SDS there.
Yeah, that's probably one of the key principles here to help get that yield benefit from early planting, because that very susceptible variety that we planted, it showed no yield benefit even clear up to the 10th of June. And then the yield started dropping off, but just kind of a flatline yield. Early planting dates did not respond with higher yield with that very susceptible variety. So, but with the tolerant varieties, we did see a very significant yield response.
And that holds across the maturity groups you tested then?
Yes. So most of the maturity groups had some level of tolerance. They weren't as susceptible, but they all showed a very significant yield increase with the earlier planting date, even with SDS.
Now, these results, Eric, are drawn from research in eastern Kansas, but wherever SDS might be a problem, further west in the state, these findings would apply generally likewise, would they not?
Yeah, I think the general principles are still there. Selecting the best variety and a good seed treatment, I think, will apply to anybody in the soybean production area that has problems with SDS.
So producers should do their due diligence as we're upon planting time. They should be checking the soybean variety performance trials out of K-State to find out which of those varieties are in fact showing some measure of tolerance against this disease.
Yes, that's a very good first step. I mean, this disease is very complex. We don't have one key thing to solve it, to totally eliminate it, but I think the combination of selecting the right variety with the right seed treatment, I think we can help get a bunch of this yield benefit that we can have from an earlier planting date.
And your research results, if a producer would like to get a glance at those directly, they're probably handy online somewhere, aren't they, Eric?
Yes, the e-update bulletins will have them, and then it will be on the Extension website. There's a publication of research reports that would be coming out later this summer. They'll have this data as well.
Excellent. But as you say, it's already out there in the e-update series out of Extension Agronomy. It's an article that was posted this past Friday, April the 27th, on sudden death syndrome and soybean planting date, K-State research findings. In closing, Eric, it is a serious enough disease that producers should be giving consideration to how they'll manage against it, right?
Yes, they're very aware of it. We can have, up to 40% yield losses. So most of them have ever had it. They know what's going on, but I think with the right management, we can increase our yield potential and not suffer as much loss as we have previously.
The Kansas Soybean Commission chose to fund and support this work to arrive at these results that will be helpful to producers in figuring out how to best defend their crops against SDS. And Eric, as always, we appreciate the update from your experiment fields in eastern Kansas, and we hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Eric Ady with us on Agriculture Today. He's the agronomist in charge of K-State's experiment fields, east central Kansas near Ottawa, and the Kansas River Valley experiment fields near Topeka. Once more, he's been looking through this research at planting dates and best management practices against sudden death syndrome in soybean production. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll return in a moment on this, the K-State Radio Network. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Welcome back to Agriculture Today. This time is set aside every week to get into horticultural topics for you. This week, we'll take up the subject of establishing those garden transplants in some of the more popular vegetables that go into the ground at this point of the season. Along with us is the Riley County Extension horticultural agent, Greg Eyestone, and we think of things like tomatoes, peppers, and there are a few other possibilities here, Greg. Transplants can successfully grow vegetables very handily, can't they?
Yeah, they usually give us a jump start on our harvest, and that's what everybody's trying to get that first tomato or whatever the crop may be. And so transplants help do that. But to get that to be as successful as possible, we usually want to get the shorter, stockier plant. That one's probably more vigorous and really ready to go. Transplant's easier, not as much transplant shock. And so when you're purchasing or looking for these transplants to put in your garden, we really do want the smaller, shorter plants. They're going to transplant quicker and easier.
The lankier ones are simply prone to lodging over and just aren't as thrifty in their early growth then.
That's a great point. Oftentimes people will ask, well, how deep do you plant your tomatoes? And there's all kinds of methods of doing that. The stem will put out some extra roots. So if it is tall and lanky, if you grew your own per se and they're tall and lanky, you may want to plant them a little deeper. But that's going to take some time for that stem to produce roots because that's not its natural characteristic. So that slows down your process of growing and your harvest down the road. So shorter, stockier plants gets established quicker. It's going to produce your fruit earlier.
And when one's out there looking, say, through their commercial outlet for tomato transplants, peppers, eggplant, whatever it might be, they need to assure that those plants are, in fact, in decent health, right?
Yeah, definitely want to have a dark green color to all those as much as possible. And the thicker the stem, the sturdier it's going to be once you plant it out into your garden. And usually this time of the year we have storms and things like that. And so to get those really established, we usually give them some kind of a shelter Some people may have planted them a little bit earlier and the soil temperatures aren't quite as warm and they're just sitting there and may use a hot cap or something like that. Probably if you wait till this time of the year, most of Kansas, you probably don't have to protect it from that coldness as much as you do just from the wind that we get at this time of the year.
And staking can accomplish that?
Staking can accomplish that. Also, anything that provides a little bit of a shelter. I use old wooden shingles around mine. So just anything that you may have around that blocks that wind probably for a week or so for it to really get rooted down and established. And then, your staking or caging process, whatever you're going to use to help support that fruit, keep it off the ground as it matures.
What about mulching freshly placed transplants then?
So mulching will help hold moisture in, which is probably a good idea, and keep weeds down, but we do want root growth. And so typically we want to wait till that soil temperature is up there a ways. Soil temperature is going to vary from site to site, but I wouldn't get in a real hurry to mulch them. But sometime mid-May, first part of June, I would probably mulch the soil to keep moisture down. And then we're also, at that point, the soil temperatures are warm enough, we're just kind of moderating the temperature so they don't continue to incline and get hotter and hotter, which roots won't like.
And at some point, that mulch will help prevent soil-borne diseases from finding their way up on the foliage of, say, peppers or tomatoes.
Yeah, we do have some soil-borne carryover diseases. It's also wind-blown quite a bit, so it's not a perfect fix, but definitely adding some mulch. And we say mulch, straw, hay, wood chips, anything that protects the soil and provides probably some organic matter down the road into the soil. And depending on your material, the coarser it is, the thicker it could be. If you use like grass clippings, as long as there's no herbicide in there, don't want to put that on very thick because that mats down and that prevents that gas or oxygen getting to the roots. So just light covering of grass clippings, using straw, something coarse, you can probably put an inch or two of that material around your plants.
And, of course, that mulch helps with weed control likewise.
Yep, it serves lots of purposes, so I do recommend doing that.
When one's putting the plant in, though, what about the use of a starter fertilizer in that planting hole or in the root ball surrounding the plant?
It's not a bad idea. A lot of our soils, at least here in Riley County, have plenty of nutrients in it. But when the soils are cooler, those roots aren't able to take it up as readily. And it doesn't take much. So a starter fertilizer or something like that, they just recommend about a cup of that solution poured over the roots when you plant it. As long as your soil test or your soil has plenty of the phosphorus in there, that's probably the one application you need. Depending on your soil conditions, if you're adding manure or something like that on an annual basis, probably don't need to add extra nitrogen during the growing season. But if you haven't done that, your plant may benefit from some nitrogen. We do have information on our website for that. And I'm not saying a lot of fertilizer, maybe twice in the growing season of nitrogen will be ample probably for growing a good tomato crop.
So you don't want to overdo that fertilization. That often happens, right?
You don't. On tomatoes in particular, you get a lot of nice vegetative material, but it stays in that way. It doesn't produce as many flowers, and so you don't get as big a crop from adding too much nitrogen. Point on peppers, they do require a little bit more nitrogen. I'm not going to see any real detriment from putting on too much nitrogen, but peppers really like the warm weather, and so I really don't encourage you buying those at the same time you buy your tomatoes. And hopefully you can find a nice source of peppers in a couple weeks when it'd be more appropriate for peppers to go in the ground. The situation we get when we plant peppers with our tomatoes is you get a plant to grow and it starts to produce some flowers, but it's really not ready to do that. Flowers drop, you get no fruit, and the plant kind of goes into a dormant stage, and you don't get peppers till later in the fall. Probably not what you're trying to accomplish. So if you wait till the conditions are just right, our pepper crop will start earlier.
And one last thing on the starter fertilization, just about any common plant food will do, just a routine analysis here?
Yeah, we're looking mostly for that phosphorus. So your fertilizer product needs to have some phosphorus, and it can be a granular that you stick in a bucket of water and let it kind of dissolve. You can, of course, buy some of the water-soluble products, even some compost tea or something. If you have some compost, set it in, fill it with some water in a bucket, and then drain that off. And so it's helpful. It doesn't take much, and so don't overdo it, but a little bit would be beneficial for your crop.
And from there, you're off and running by and large, provided storms don't take out your plants or whatever. But you should be good to go, should you not, Greg?
Yeah, as long as the temperatures continue to climb, and tomatoes obviously have some disease and insects and things that can occur along the way, but we get them going off pretty quickly, and that's our goal, is to get a crop as soon as we can.
As Greg said, there's ample and then some information on garden transplanting at the K-State Horticulture website, and we appreciate the input, as always, Greg. Thank you.
Thank you.
Over from the Riley County Extension Office, the horticultural agent there, Greg Eyestone, on this week's K-State Horticulture segment. Our time's away for today. Thanks for listening in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.